So we are in Daniel chapter 6, which means that after this week, we are officially halfway done with the book. Here's the outline that I've been showing y'all every single week. The book kind of is just structured very nice and simply, The first 6 chapters are stories, the last 6 chapters are visions. But we did talk about there's other structural things that are just kind of weird because the book is written in 2 different languages. You can't pick up on that whenever we translate it into English because we translate it all into English. You know, I just thought about that. That'd be kind of a fun thing to do if, like, chapter 1 and then chapters 8 through 12 were, like, normal English, and then we did, like, chapters 2 through 7 in, like, King James English or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like, so something to, like, indicate it's different. That might be kind of fun.
Too late now.
Yeah, it is a bit too late. But I'm saying, like, that would be kind of an interesting way to at least convey it, or, I don't know, just something that conveys it's different. But we are almost to the end of the Aramaic section. But after this week, we are at the end of the third person section, to where after this, everything's going to be in first person, but there is one more chapter in Aramaic, and because chapter 7 is the one that kind of sticks out, I've just kind of had that circled the whole time because, in general, whenever you look at a book and something breaks the structure, there's something weird going on with that book, like that section, right? It's kind of like whenever you're reading through Genesis chapter 1, and you're reading, you know, and God saw that it was good, and there was evening and morning the first day. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and morning the second day. And God saw that it was good. Like, there's this poem, and, like, there's this pattern. Then you get to the end of day 6, and it says, and God saw that it was good. And you're expecting it to say, and there was evening and morning the 6th day. But then it says, and God said, let us make man in our image. And it turns out the day isn't quite over yet. And so anytime a pattern is broken, that's usually an indication that you're getting to, like, a focal point, right? And so, chapter 7, I've got that circled because there's something going on there. And so, whenever we gather together next week, we will have to talk about it. Because I don't think we should be surprised that that is the chapter that the New Testament quotes from the most when it comes to the book of Daniel. And so, where we're at right now, we are coming near the very end of that Aramaic section. We talked about how there is this, like, parallel structure to where chapter 2 and chapter 7 both deal with dreams. Chapter 3 and in chapter 6, you have these miraculous deliverances where these Jewish people, their faith is tested. And then God miraculously delivers them from death. So back in chapter 3, we saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego delivered from the fiery furnace. And today we are talking about Daniel being delivered from the lion's den. So these are the 2 most famous stories in the book of Daniel. And then in chapters 4 and 5, we dealt with kings being humbled. In the Nebuchadnezzar story, he had this dream where there was this giant tree, and it basically represented him, and the tree gets cut down to a stump. And that represented how God was going to cut Nebuchadnezzar down and basically drive him mad for 7 periods of time, which seems to be 7 years. It doesn't exactly say. And so we saw that. And then by the end of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar actually praises God. And that is the high point of this entire story because since this section is written in Aramaic, which is the language of the Babylonians, it almost seems like the message is being directed towards the Babylonians. And what we get to see is that even though the Jewish people have rejected their God and have been sent into exile, God actually uses their hardness of heart to bring Gentiles to him. And the cool thing there is that Nebuchadnezzar is the very person who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, right? He is like the number 1 bad guy of the Old Testament. Yet by the end of chapter 4, he is praising God. And so it really shows you how, like to echo the words of like in the book of Genesis, what the enemy means for evil, God can work for good. And so not only can God employ Nebuchadnezzar to do like judgment upon the people of Judah, but God can also use the stubborn people of Judah to change the heart of Nebuchadnezzar to where he ends up worshiping God. So that's really cool. Then last week, we got to chapter 5, which is another pretty famous story, where we got another pagan king, this one several generations away from Nebuchadnezzar, and his name is Belshazzar, and basically he's throwing a feast, and while he's throwing the feast, a hand literally just shows up and starts writing words in the wall. And Belshazzar is obviously really confused by this, especially because he's drunk. And he's like, what the heck is going on? He freaks out, and he calls everybody forward, and they have to interpret the writing. And like we're used to at this point in the story, Daniel's the only one who's able to interpret it. And he basically says, the writing is saying that you are screwed and that your kingdom is about to end. And that very night, Belshazzar dies, and what we read at the very end of chapter 5 is that Darius the Mede took over when he was 62 years of age. And so where we're at today is in Daniel and the Den. And so this is just another little timeline thing right here. What I mainly want to direct your attention to is up at top. You've got the 3 prophets who were active at this time period. It's very rare in the Bible where you have different prophets who are functioning like at the exact same time. There might be prophets functioning at the same time, but I'm talking about ones who wrote down books. There are prophets like Elijah and Elisha, but they didn't write books. Whereas we do have Jeremiah, Daniel, and Ezekiel all writing at roughly the same time or like overlapping time periods. And you'll notice that Daniel spans the longest of this, to where Daniel predates the destruction of Jerusalem, but he also lasts until the Medo-Persian Empire takes over. And so Daniel just really spans the entire exile, and that's kind of significant. And that kind of tells us a little bit about the story. And so where we are at currently is we are at the right where you see the Babylon and the Medo-Persian part where they meet, right? To where the orange and the red are together. That's where we're currently at in the story. That all being said, let's actually hop into the story itself. It's less than 30 verses, but we've got some really, really, really fun stuff ahead of us tonight. Like I said, it's a famous story, but as always, our goal is not simply to know the Sunday school version of the story. It is to actually figure out what is the purpose of the story at all. And so, starting in verse 1. Actually, real quick, let me just reread the end of chapter 5, because this is one of those places where it seems like the last verse of chapter 5 really belongs at the beginning of chapter 6. Because it says, the same night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and then it says, so Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. And then we read this. It seemed good to Darius that he set 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because an extraordinary spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and satraps began seeking to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to matters of the kingdom. But they were not able to find any ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors, have counseled together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who seeks to make a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days, shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the written document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the written document. That is the injunction. All right. So, what happens here? Set the scene.
After Darius takes over Babylon, he decides to set some regional rulers over it, because that's kind of what the Persians were almost known for doing. It was a typical tactic of medieval empires that once you conquered a land, you would take certain people from within the land that you had just conquered, or you would set some from your own land to rule over it so that you weren't stretching yourself out too much and they could report back to you about what they found. So he sets up this kind of commissioner system. Daniel ends up becoming one of the commissioners, and because of the Spirit of God that is within him, he starts to set himself apart. He starts to set himself apart from the other commissioners and regional rulers at the time, and people get jealous of this, so they want to find grounds to accuse him of things because they want to remove him from power before he gets full control over Babylon,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. They're threatened by him.
Yeah. And so, knowing that he is extremely faithful to God, they use the law against him by saying anyone who, you know, what's the exact wording?
Verse 8, now, O king, establish the injunction. Oh, hold up. No, it's the previous verse. Anyone who seeks to make a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days
Yes.
will be cast into the lion's den.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we will have to talk about what the heck the deal with that is. Yeah, so the whole story, it comes from jealousy, right? These guys are jealous that Daniel is better than them, and so they want to take him down. Has there been any other story that we've encountered like this so far?
Didn't this happen a lot to Jeremiah and Joseph?
I'm talking about even in the book of Daniel.
The fire.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that, Joseph?
Nebuchadnezzar told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you better, initially he kind of told the whole crowd, all the nobles, everybody's like, when the instruments start playing, worship the statue. And so all of them, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, didn't worship, and eventually like some of the Chaldeans go up to Nebuchadnezzar and say, hey look, these guys aren't worshiping. You said that if nobody, and he essentially gave an empty threat, and he said that if they don't bow down, we'll throw them in the fire. And so they force his hand, they get thrown in the fire.
Yeah, and so if you remember back in Daniel chapter 3, it didn't even tell us right off the bat that those three guys did not kneel down. The way that we learned about it is whenever a group of people came and reported it to the king. Right? They were like, hey, there's these three Jewish guys who aren't bowing down. And so it's exactly the same thing, right? You've got these people who are evidently jealous, and so they are intentionally throwing these Jewish guys under the bus. The difference here is that Nebuchadnezzar, back in that story, he's the one who established that edict of his own accord, right? He said, I'm building a statue, I'm going to make you kneel down. And then there's some people who saw it as an opportunity to call out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whereas this thing right here is something that has entirely been coordinated by the satraps, right? They're the ones who are scheming in the background to find, like, they're basically, the reason they suggest this whole thing is in order to specifically target Daniel, right? So the other one was like a happy accident. This one is an intentional target. So let's walk through it. It seemed good to Darius that he set 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. So, what is a satrap? It's not a word we use very often. It's an even weirder word in Aramaic. You want to hear what this word is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gosh. Ahashdarpani. No, it's Ahar. Oh gosh. Ahashdarpani. It's weird. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 9 letters, but like that's like without the vowels. So it's like it's a long word. That's crazy. Ahashdarpani. So what is a satrap? It's just governor of a Persian province. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like from the description.
Yeah. So he appoints these 120 guys, and over them, 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one. Presumably, this is like, I would assume, 1 commissioner over 40 each. Or it's just like, I guess each one could have authority over all of them, but it's just like a funneling down process. Why do you think Darius might do this? What were the circumstances at the end of the last chapter?
It was just like he was saying the last king just died, so he was kind of setting in stone like his authority.
Yeah, but why would he put Daniel in charge?
Oh.
Like, what did we see happen at the very end of the last chapter? Like, what happened because Daniel was able to interpret the writing?
He was essentially made the third ruler over Babylon.
Yeah, he was put, like, basically third in charge. And we talked a little bit about why that was. It's actually really funny because Belshazzar is saying, hey, whoever can interpret this, I'm going to make them third in charge. which is really just, it shows you how desperate he was. He is not nearly as wise of a king as Nebuchadnezzar was. And then we also talked about the reason why he said third in charge is probably because Belshazzar was not actually the king in charge of all things. The text does call him king, but whenever we, like what we talked about at the end of last week, we actually looked at the archaeological evidence, and it seems like Belshazzar's father was the actual king, but Belshazzar's father spent a lot of time outside of the land, and the Babylonian records tell us that he left Belshazzar in charge. And so technically, Belshazzar is second in command, and his father is the actual king, but he says Daniel can be third in command. And that's one of those really cool things that kind of just helps support the Bible, because the text does not explain that. Belshazzar just says third in command, and it doesn't explain why it isn't second in command. But then if you actually look at the Babylonian records, they explain it. It's like, oh, well, Belshazzar was actually second in command, and so it all kind of works out. And so these guys, they just took over, right? Darius comes in, he kills Belshazzar, the Babylonian Empire has come to an end, and they're trying to figure out how to structure things. And there's this guy who has a known track record for being very wise and very faithful. He served under Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians' best king, and then he was, like, literally on the night that Belshazzar was killed, he was appointed third in command over the entire region then as well. And so if you are a conquering king coming in here, it's best to figure out, like, who knows their way around the court system and who can actually manage authority well. And so it makes sense why Daniel would be one of these three people, because he's been here for a while, right? At this point, Daniel's an old man. In the earlier chapters of Daniel, he's just a young guy, but he's been doing this for a few decades. He knows his way around. It makes sense for them to put him there. So, over them, the three commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. So why is it that the king is afraid of suffering loss? Nick kind of addressed this earlier.
Conquered peoples have a tendency to revolt. So it's not necessarily good for you to just kind of like be like, oh, we took over, I guess everything's hunky-dory now. No, you kind of have to like set a system in place where you have the ability to enforce the rules that you want to have over everyone instead of just like letting them do their own thing.
Yeah. And this is also just a general principle of leadership. Whenever you are, like, whenever there's a shift in leadership, it is in that new leader's best interest to not shake things up too quickly. You see this all the time in churches, right? There are like times where like a new pastor is hired and he like has like this vision for what he wants to do with things. And at first the congregation is like, ooh, a new guy, this is awesome. And then after like 2 or 3 months, they're like, we like our old ways. And it's like, they get nervous. But even more relevant to a lot of people in this room, Arlen's, right? The grocery store. That's like our local grocery store, just like right down the street. And a few years ago, it was purchased by a new group of people. And whenever they came in, they changed everything. Like basically overnight.
And my whole department got the boot.
Yes, your whole department. Like it's like they changed everything. They fired a bunch of people. They changed everything. And because it was a small town grocery store, like if you went on Facebook and you went to like the Talk of Seabrook page and stuff like that, it was all you heard about. They're like, Arlen's has gone downhill. It's because they changed too many things too quickly. And so it's been funny, like just over the course of the next few months and stuff, or like last few years, watching them slowly like revert things a bit to where they're still trying to keep their own identity, but also they're like, oh, I think we changed too much too quickly. But this is true in all things, right? You don't want to change things too much, and so Darius he's being wise here, right? He's like, okay, this is a new empire, but by and large, you don't want people to feel like it's a new empire, or else people are going to revolt. Because keep in mind, the things that, like, nowadays for us, because we live in this, like, technologically advanced society where we have, like, news channels and stuff like that, the common everyday layperson is far more aware of human history than ancient people were. Right? Nowadays, we know everything that's going on, like the White House and, like, over in Saudi Arabia and all that stuff. Back in ancient times, that is simply not the case, right? The things that we read about in history books, whenever one empire falls and another empire rises, the average everyday person would not have felt the difference. To them, life just kept going on like normal, unless the empire just radically changed things. right? So like whenever the Roman Empire fell, it kind of just like sizzled out, right? And so there's a lot of people who were just like, they just kept on living life like normal, didn't even realize the Roman Empire had fallen. But now in this case, Babylon fell overnight. And so the Persians could just like change things up drastically, but instead they're like, let's play it smart. Let's put people in charge who know their way around and who can keep things relatively simple. And then what we see over time is that the Persians, very wisely, the way that they begin to establish their power and change things up is actually by restoring the communities that the Babylonians had taken away. Right? So whenever Cyrus the Great rises up, the thing he does the first year he's in charge is he says, the Jews can go back to their homeland, and I'm going to fund them rebuilding their temple. And so he's changing things up, but in a way that everybody's going to love. Because the Babylonians said, we're going to destroy your temple and take you away. Nobody likes that. But now it's saying, we're going to send you back, and we're going to fund your rebuilding project. They're like, okay, we like the Persians. And so that's kind of how the Persians are going to do things. Verse 3. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself amongst the commissioners and satraps because an extraordinary spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. All right, so what happens now?
Daniel shows his worth.
Yeah, he shows that even though he was already pretty much at the top, but he proves, I guess he excelled even above the other two of the commissioners that were appointed there. Now, where have we seen that phrase before in regards to Daniel, about him having an extraordinary spirit?
When it talks about his ability to like interpret the dreams.
Yeah, so it was in, I'm looking right now, it's in Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 5. Yeah, so Daniel chapter 4, it says, Daniel came in before Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel's name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of Nebuchadnezzar's God, in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. Right? And Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, since I know that a spirit of the holy gods is in you. So this is the way that Nebuchadnezzar talked about it. And he says, you will make known to me the interpretation of my dream, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. And then in chapter 5, Belshazzar says the same thing. Right? So Daniel has this reputation that precedes him.
Yeah.
Right? There's a spirit of the holy gods within him to where whenever people look at him, he's not simply a wise person. He is so wise that people have concluded that there's something supernatural about his wisdom, which is kind of cool. And so, because of this, he is being elevated even higher to where everybody else, presumably a lot of whom might actually be people who, maybe they grew up in Babylon. So we don't know their situation, but they're all jealous of this, right? I mean, it's like whenever you're working at any job, and this one guy is just good at everything and just excelling at all things. You're just like, this punk's gotta go, right? It's like they're just like, this sucks. Like they're over here slaving away, and no matter how hard they slave away, Daniel is just better than them, and it just seems natural because it's not coming from him; it's coming from God. So the commissioners and satraps began seeking to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to matters of the kingdom. So what is the first thing they try to do?
They're trying to see if he did any bad things.
Yeah.
Essentially,
The kingdom.
they're doing the equivalent of what a lot of people do when like a new politician comes to fame, right? Is that when James Tallarico rose up, everybody started going through his old Twitter posts and this and that.
I was about to say that. They're going through the ancient form of his Twitter account. That's what they're doing. What we would say is they're trying to dig up dirt.
Yeah.
Right? They are examining him left and right, and they're like, all right, this guy can't be that squeaky clean. We got to find something that could, knock him down a peg. Oh, the dog is looking at us. It's terrifying.
No, it's funny. She was just running around in circles outside earlier.
That's funny. Yeah, so they're like, okay, we need to dig up some dirt on this guy. Surely there is something that we can raise against him. But they were not able to find any ground of accusation or evidence of corruption. Dang. That's disappointing for them. But it's really good news for Daniel. Because what does that say about him?
He's a good guy.
He's a good guy. But especially keep in mind, they're not even talking about in regards to the Jewish law right now. What are they talking about? What law are they, or like, what are they trying to test him by right now?
The Babylonian.
Yeah, his conduct in the kingdom of Babylon, or I guess Medo-Persia, right? So they're judging him based off of cultural standards, yet they can't find anything to condemn him for. That's interesting to me, because in a second, what they're going to do is they're going to realize, okay, well, if we're going to condemn him, it has to be something in regards to his own, like the Torah, basically. But I find that interesting just because it tells us a lot about how Daniel viewed, I guess, his responsibility as a Jew living in foreign territory, right? I think it is like, I don't know. As Christians, whenever we talk about what it means to obey God, what do we immediately think of? Like, how do we know how to obey God? What do we have to study? And what do we have to listen to? The Bible, right? That's why we dedicate every single week to gathering together and studying the Bible, because this is our number one authority, and like, if we want to obey God, this is how we do it. But it doesn't stop there, apparently, right? According to like Daniel, the way that you actually obey God is by obeying the authorities that God has placed above you. And that does not... What's that?
It's something that's stated over and over again in the Bible.
Yeah, it's something that, like, whenever you get to the New Testament, like, the apostles just clearly say, like, obey the authorities, obey the authorities, obey the authorities. And I think that nowadays it's very, like, usually the Christian response is... I mean, I even heard this from the pulpit where people are like, well, yeah, but the authorities aren't godly. But then you're like, okay, was Nebuchadnezzar godly? Okay, is Darius godly? No. Was Nero godly? No. But they were, like, the whole point is you're supposed to obey the authorities until you no longer can. And we're going to see Daniel get to that point, and it's going to be very interesting where he chooses to draw the line. But I just find that very interesting that even when they're judging him by their cultural standards, they're saying, wow, there's nothing by which to condemn him. Whereas I think, even for myself, there's probably places where you could look at me and be like, yeah, I'm not listening to the authorities above me as properly. Like, I definitely prioritize trying to live by the Bible, but there's probably places where I'm like, I kind of justify, I mean, all you have to do is see me driving down the road and you'll see that I'm speeding all the time. But they have nothing to accuse him of. And that says a lot about him. And, I mean, Nick and I have talked about this because you've been reading through Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, like we saw at the beginning, he's contemporary with Daniel. But in his book, on several occasions, he says, like, he basically puts Daniel on the same level as, I believe it's Job and Noah, right? And he basically says that Daniel was, like, up there with, like, Job and Noah when it comes to righteousness. And, I mean, that's a pretty high standard, right? Noah is the one righteous person in a world of wicked people. And then Job is literally the person that God brings up whenever Satan is like, you know what? I'm having a tough time stumping people. Like, I just want somebody to test who's, like, impossible to tempt. And God's like, Job? So, like Noah and Job are, like, two of the most righteous people in the Bible. And Ezekiel lumps Daniel up there with them. And Daniel's his contemporary. And that blows my mind. That's like, if literally talking to y'all right now, I compared, like, Joseph to King David. It's like, that's high praise. I'm not saying that I can't compare you. I'm just saying, like, I'd be very hesitant to, because it's like,
yeah,
it's like,
that's
like
a high bar.
That's a high bar, right? But that's what Ezekiel does. And so it seems like, in general, Daniel did actually have this reputation of just being, like, up there. Assuming that Daniel did write the book, it doesn't seem like he's being boastful here. He's literally just saying, oh, this is the reputation I had. And so they could not find anything in order to condemn him. Also, side note real quick. Is there any other story in the Bible where a group of religious leaders seek to condemn a righteous man according to a law, and they cannot find any grounds by which to accuse him? Who am I talking about? Jesus.
Pharisees.
I want to point out that that's not the only parallel we're going to have with Jesus in this story. And so I'm going to challenge y'all to look for parallels throughout this, because they're everywhere in this chapter. And then at the very end, if y'all remind me, I'll share some of the parallels with you. But that's just to get the ball rolling here, because it actually goes, like, the parallels are like boom, 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 boom. It's pretty cool. So, The commissioners and satraps, they began seeking to find ground to accuse against Daniel in regard to the matters of the kingdom, but they were not able to find any ground of accusation or evidence of growth, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. And notice when it says faithful here, it's not just talking about faithful to God, right? Because again, it's the laws of the kingdom. He's being faithful to the king. And that's also in spite of the fact that there is now a new kingdom in charge, right? It's not like he said, hey, well, Belshazzar is my king. He says, no, like, whoever God puts in charge, he is now behind them, right? That should always say something to us also, because that means whoever the president is at that time, whether you agree with them politically or not, that's the one that God's put in charge, which we just have to keep in mind. I guess that you could argue that no matter what, whoever's in charge is in charge. But I think sometimes what I see Christians pushing back against is that we do live in a democracy where people vote them into office. But in the end, God is the one who's in charge of all that as well. And so we just have to honor that. And so he is faithful, no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. This is very similar to what we talked about whenever we studied 1 Peter. I think it was last year or maybe 2 years ago at this point. But it says, keep your conduct faithful amongst the Gentiles, right? So they have no reason to accuse you. And if people are if they're going to accuse you of something, let it not be of evil, right? Let them accuse you and slander you for how good you are. And so that's what Daniel is. So these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. And so what conclusion do they arrive at?
Okay, we can't find anything against him at our standards. So they're like, okay, we have to go through the Torah and see A, if he contradicts any of his God's laws, or B, if we can somehow wrap it to where he's not worshiping our gods and worshiping his God, and then we can spin it and say, hey, he's not worshiping our God, therefore he's in violation of our law.
Yeah, so it's specifically the last one, right? The way it's worded might incline you to... I think that the author's being very subtle here, because it almost seems like they're saying, okay, well, we've analyzed the kingdom's laws. Now let's see if we can trip him up according to his own law, like the Torah. But instead, I think that, like whenever you get to the next few verses, it reveals what their true agenda was. It seems like they already were aware, okay, if he's following our kingdom's laws, he's probably following his God's laws as well. And so whenever it says we need to find something against him in regard to the law of his God, it's not that they think that he's not following God's law. It's that they need to go study the law and figure out a way where they can use that. Like, basically, they need to find a way to pit the law of God against the law of the nation. So that, basically, Daniel has to choose sides. Because since he's such a faithful person, he also has a reputation as a devout Jew, they know which side he's going to pick. And so if he picks the God of the Jews, well, that puts him in opposition with the king. Right? And so... that's really what they're going for, but I think that the wording is intentionally vague, so that when you have to get to the next few verses to realize how malicious they are, right? At this point, we just think, oh, they're just trying to analyze him from all sides. But in reality, they're like, no. He really is without blemish. We've got to find a way to pit them against each other.
And then this is what the Pharisees did with Jesus, is they just studied the law of Moses and found something to pin him for blasphemy.
Well, kind of. Right? So the reason why the Pharisees rejected Jesus is because they called him blasphemous, right? Because he was claiming to be God. Mm-hmm. But when they brought him before the Romans, is that what they accused him of?
No.
What did they accuse him of?
They accused him of basically, denouncing Caesar.
Yeah, they accused him of claiming to be a king, right? Which is really ironic, because if Jesus was simply claiming to be a king, the Pharisees would have had no problem with him. I mean, they would have had a problem with him because... he was rebuking them all the time. But the thing is, the Jewish people wanted a king to show up. And so to show up and claim to be a king was not like a radical thing to do from a Jewish perspective. There were other people who claimed to be the Messiah. And so their issue with Jesus was that he claimed to be God. But whenever they brought Jesus before the Romans, they did the same thing that these guys are doing right here. They are specifically bringing up a charge that takes Jesus' claims and puts it at odds with the empire, right? And so they say, hey, he claims to be a king. Because while the Jews don't mind him claiming to be a king, the Romans do. And the Romans, ironically, they would not care if he claimed to be God. If anything, if Jesus claims to be God, they would find that reason to fear him. Because from a Roman perspective, the gods show up all the time, right? Zeus and I guess Jupiter, they show up all the time in human form. And so if Jesus is a god, they need to maybe he has like an omen for them or something like that. But if he claims to be a king, only Caesar is king. And so the Pharisees and the high priests, they do the same thing to Jesus as these guys are doing, right? They're finding a way to accuse him in such a way that puts him at odds with the empire. And so that's what these guys are going to do. So these commissioners and satraps, it's so sad to me that it says the commissioners and the satraps, right? Because you would expect this from the satraps, because we know there's 120 of them, right? From 120 people, there's a few who are bound to be jealous. But apart from Daniel, how many commissioners are there? There's 2. And apparently, and it says the commissioners, which means that both of them were involved in this, right? So it's it doesn't say one of the commissioners, no, both of them. There were only 2, both of them were involved in the scheme. So the commissioners and the satraps, they came by agreement to the king. The phrase by agreement, what does that suggest?
They're all on the same page.
They're all on the same page, which means that they have gathered ahead of time to determine what they're going to, what we're going to see is that what they're going to suggest to Darius is very specific and very targeted, which means that they have been analyzing Daniel for a while, and they know exactly what will trip him up, right? They know exactly the way to condemn him.
These guys studied.
So you're saying it seems like there might be a couple months to a year between 5 and 6.
I don't know. I don't know. It seems like what we're going to see,
see
Daniel was a pretty... it seems like he was a very scheduled person, as we're going to see
Because
momentarily.
it seems like they would have to study him for at least some period of time.
Yes, but to be fair, he's been a very prominent person in the... I'm assuming that his reputation was already preceding him, so I can't say how long it's been. We don't really know, but my whole point is that they have been studying him, and apparently the way he's been living was in such an open way to where they all could come to agreement that this one thing will trip him up. Despite the fact that to most people in the ancient Near Eastern world that they live in, what they're going to suggest actually would not trip them up at all. But for Daniel in particular, it's going to mess him up. And that's what's so interesting about this. So they came by agreement to the king, and they said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors, have counseled together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction. And so, before we get to the injunction itself, what are they claiming?
They want the king to establish injunction or statute.
Yeah, but by whose authority?
His.
Well, yes, his, but they're citing all of themselves, right? They're the ones that he has placed in charge of the kingdom, and they're the ones that he has entrusted to know what is best for the kingdom. Right, and so they say all the commissioners of the kingdom, which there's a lie there, right? Because I can guarantee you that there is one commissioner. there's only 3 commissioners. There's one commissioner who has not agreed to this, and the whole irony behind that as well. This probably isn't the same. It isn't probably true in Aramaic as well, but the word "all" would seem to imply 3 or more, right? Because if it's just 2, you would say both, and so there's only 3. But they say all, which would not be correct. So there's a lie. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors. So basically, every single person that you have placed in charge by your wisdom has counseled together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who seeks to make a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. This is a very interesting request to me. What do you think their logic is behind? We know what their goal is, but they're having to sell this to the king. How on earth does this even sound like a good idea? Because obviously, they're not just going to tell, if he asks why, they're not going to say, oh, we're trying to set a trap for Daniel. They have to sell this like this is a legitimately good idea for the kingdom. How are they selling that?
Are they invoking the king's pride?
Perhaps.
Appealing to his pride, they may be trying to approach it from an angle that, hey, if you want a unified nation, this is what you have to do, and we have your best interests at heart because we're trying to keep this new nation unified.
Hey, the Babylonians tried it. Wonder how that went last time.
Yeah. Well, I would actually lean towards it probably being that one, mainly because we know with Nebuchadnezzar it was his pride, 100%, right? Because again, we have to read this story in light of what we saw with the fiery furnace story. And with Nebuchadnezzar, he's the one who said everybody has to bow down before this, and his whole goal was, the goal of Babel, like of Babel in general, to make a,
So the parallel,
one world empire. Was that?
The parallel here would be that this is essentially how the Jews brought this to like Pilate when they're trying to, sell the capital
Yes.
punishment for Jesus.
Yeah. Well, and what you're
They
going to
have
see
reveal
is
like,
how did Pontius Pilate respond to them bringing Jesus before him? Like, did Pilate want to kill Jesus? No. Interestingly, Darius is not going to want to kill Daniel either. Which again, that's interesting because Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember, he wanted to kill Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, he did try to get them to stop. Like, he was like, guys, like, let's just do a do-over. We'll play the music again. You can bow down. We'll act like this never happened. But then whenever they actually refuse anyways, he says, okay, you're going to die. And so, again, you have to read these stories in light of each other. Nebuchadnezzar is being fueled by pride. Darius seems to be being fueled by something else. And so I don't have a clear answer here, but I'm assuming it's along the lines of what Joseph was saying, in that the logic is that they're trying to unify the people around a certain cause.
Or that's what they're making it seem like anyway.
Yes. Well, because I think that inherently that always sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about boosting morale. Like, let's get people to unify around this one particular cause and everything will be better. And, like, Darius if you're Darius, you might be thinking, that doesn't sound so good, because there are loopholes here, obviously, and we're going to see them pop up very quickly. But the issue is, who's the one suggesting this to him?
the people he put in charge.
The people he put in charge, right? And the reason he put them there is because he should be able to trust them, ideally. And so, to me, I think there's very obviously, like, all you have to do is look at this for a second and realize there are some big issues here, right? Not everybody's going to necessarily want to do this. But think of this from an ancient perspective. Or let me ask you this. Why is it that we have an issue with this command?
Because it says that you cannot petition to any god or man besides the king.
Yeah.
Which would be in violation of the Bible.
Yeah, so we have an issue with that because we say that there is one God who's in charge of all things. But from an ancient perspective, why might that not be as much of an issue?
Because they all were like, oh, there's tons of gods, so.
Yeah, they view them... Oh, sorry, what's that?
It's like, why would I choose mine over another at the, potential cost of my own life?
Yeah, well, and also, it's not forever, right? It's for 30 days. And so the idea is, okay, well, for 30 days, we're going to devote all of our attention on this one king, and we're going to almost treat him as a god, right? So it does appeal to Darius in a way, but it's also, it wouldn't necessarily run contrary to most of the people in the kingdom's religion, right? Most people would say, okay, this is fine, sure. I mean, yeah, we typically offer sacrifices and petitions to other gods, but it's only for a month, right? We'll just put that off. The gods will understand. This is all about us embracing this new empire and showing homage to the new king. And so I think that's how, from their perspective, they're selling it like, this doesn't seem like an extreme command to most people. But again, it shows how much they've been studying Daniel. Because they know for a fact that Daniel will not be fine with this. Because Daniel will not, even for 30 days, he will not stop paying homage to his God. Which I think that's just so interesting. Because they know, it's funny because they don't even say for a year or something like that. They know he can't, he will not even go a month without this. That just says a whole lot about Daniel. So now, okay, establish the injunction and sign the written document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. So what do they ask him to do?
Make it official.
Yeah, make it official. And according to them, what was the standard for the Medes and Persians in regards to how they made laws?
That any law that was made by them could not be overruled, which we saw in the book of Esther.
We did. We saw that in the book of Esther. Some of y'all weren't here that day. There were only a few of us, but that was the day whenever I told y'all to bring masks. It sounded like I was starting a cult, but I wasn't starting a cult. What we did is that Tuesday was the Feast of Purim, according to the Jewish calendar, and so we read through the book of Esther that day. And the reason you wear a mask is because the Jewish festival of Purim is basically Halloween, because just like Esther was hidden in the courts of the king, so they dress in costumes on that day and stuff. And so, yeah, whenever you read the book of Esther, which is set during the Persian Empire, we see the same type of custom. It seems like a very weird way to handle laws, though, right? Because the idea is that once you've put this law in motion, it cannot be revoked, which seems kind of foolish. But
it can have other laws that like counteract it.
Kind of, yeah. So in Esther, basically what we see with all of these, and it seems like let me, I got a question I'm going to ask, but let me clarify it first, I guess. There are obviously ways around this, right? So yes, they make a law and they say it cannot be revoked, but in both stories where we have one of those laws being put in motion, immediately afterwards, something is put in motion to wiggle around it. And so what we see is that this standard of things not being able to be revoked is more performative than it is anything else, right? Because in reality, these laws are no different than a lot of other laws. It just gives off the presentation of permanence. So in Esther's case, all the Jews are going to be killed on this day, and that cannot be revoked out of principle. But we will set in guard, there's another law which now allows the Jews to defend themselves. And if they kill their oppressors, we won't, imprison them. And so so now all of a sudden it's kind of, that in that case it's kind of stupid, because now all of a sudden you just have two groups of people who are just killing each other, and you get no benefit from it. And so in both cases where a law like this is put in motion in the Bible, we see how it backfires. And when we get to the end of today's chapter and talk about some application, I do want to talk about that a little bit. But my question to y'all real quick is, even though we see that there are loopholes, and it seems like the Persians were aware that there were loopholes because they're constantly finding ways around the law, why do you think that they framed it as if their laws could not be revoked? What is the purpose of saying that, since they're constantly trying to revoke them?
That their rule was like absolute.
Yeah, that's it. Like they're trying to show how powerful they are, right? Once they're almost like presenting their words as being divine in nature, right? Their words are not simply scribbled in pencil; they are etched in stone, right? And what I have said cannot be revoked. It's a power move. But then the irony is that these guys, they think they're more powerful than they actually are, and so more often than not, whenever they make a law, it bites them in the butt and backfires, and so they end up having to find a way to wriggle around it, because it turns out that they are not gods. They think they are, but they're not. And so there's only one God who is truly in charge of all things, who is truly sovereign, and who actually knows how to handle the law in a permanent way. These other guys, they think they're gods, and they think that their words are etched in stone, but in reality, he's just the one who allowed them to be in charge. And so I just find that very humorous whenever you read Esther and Daniel. Both times, it's like, these laws can't be revoked. And then immediately afterwards, the kings are like, dang, I really wish I could revoke that. To where it's like, the irony is that the power that they've established for themselves is too powerful for even themselves. To where they're like, am I a victim of my own creation? It's like Frankenstein or something like that. All right, verse 9. Therefore, King Darius signed the written document, that is the injunction. So he does it. And some people might look at this and say, wow, he's so stupid. No, that is the purpose of these satraps and stuff. Their purpose is to advise the king. And if all of them come together and they say, we all agree on this, he's going to be like, okay, cool. I mean, that's the same thing that you see in even in the White Houses of today, right? I can guarantee you that President Trump does not come up with every single thing that he signs on his desk, right? There's all these other people who are like, hey, sign this. And he's like, all right, cool. I mean, it's kind of like whenever you sign, you check the terms and agreements on different stuff whenever you're signing up for things on you don't read all of it. Your whole thing is like, all right, well, I'm going to trust that y'all know better than I do, and so you check off, right? So Darius, he signs off on it, and he puts this injunction in motion that cannot be revoked. And we move on. Oh, I have to move up here real quick. A pop-up had come up on the screen so that my thingy's not clicking. Boop. Boom, okay. Sweet. Now when Daniel knew that the written document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel seeking to make a petition and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the king's injunction, "Did you not sign an injunction that any man who seeks to make a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den?" The king answered and said, "The word is certain, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked." Then they answered and said before the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps seeking to make his petition 3 times a day." Then, as soon as the king heard this word, he was greatly distressed within himself, and he set his mind on saving Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to deliver him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed."
Oh no.
I'm just going to tell you that these guys are not as smart as they think they are, because this is not a way to get a promotion, right? Right here, they're displaying their cards, and it's very clearly manipulative, to where it's like you already know how this story is going to end before you even get to the end of it. Like, even if Daniel died in the lion's den, you know that these guys aren't making it out alive, right? Like this, like Darius, he's no fool. He's like, okay, I see what's going on here, and so, yeah. So what happens?
Daniel keeps going through his normal routine, like everything's, fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's like, I ain't gonna stop just because y'all made some stupid law. Like,
True.
I got a God to be faithful to.
That's funny. Yeah. Also, we really never talked about, like, I mean, we haven't talked about this yet, but what's the deal with the lion's den? Why lion's den?
Persia, lions, I don't know.
I honestly don't either. It seems like in general, I mean, I had a better explanation for the fiery furnace, because it literally said that they just made this giant golden statue, and you would need a fiery furnace for that, and so it makes sense how, like, you don't bow before the statue, then you get cast into the place where it was made. That makes sense. The lion's den, I genuinely don't know. I mean, I know that there is an association between lions and Babylon, and so maybe it's like, hey, well, if he doesn't bow before you, then he can go die with the Babylonians. I have no idea. Or they're just being creative. The Persians were known for, they were known for brutal torture methods. They're the ones who invented crucifixion, and the Romans are the ones who perfected it. But, yeah, so, I don't know. I just think that's interesting. So, now when Daniel knew that the written document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously.
So he just keeps up the same routine.
Keeps up the same routine. So, but what's the issue? I mean, why is he praying towards Jerusalem?
I'm going to say that's where God dwelt here in kind of Solomon.
Yeah, that's where God dwells in the temple. But what's the irony there?
Temple is gone.
Temple's gone. There's no temple at this point, right? This is long after. I mean, the temple was still standing at the beginning of the book of Daniel, but this is decades later, right? The Babylonians aren't even in charge anymore, right? Nebuchadnezzar is the one who destroyed the temple, right? We're decades after Nebuchadnezzar. That temple is demolished, and the city of Jerusalem's demolished, right? Everybody else, they're all Babylon. But he's still praying towards Jerusalem. Why?
It was a sign of reverence.
I think it's also like a desire for the people to return one day. Like
Okay.
he knows that the exile is going to come to an end. I guess.
Yeah. There is also a verse that's in 1 Kings. I'm trying to find exactly where it's at. But I'm going to start reading it. This is whenever Solomon's dedicating the temple. And he's praying to God. He says, "Yet have regard to the prayer of your slave and to his supplication, O Yahweh my God, and listen to the cry and to the prayer which your slave prays before you today, that your eyes may be opened toward this house night and day, toward the place of which you have said, my name shall be there, to listen to the prayer which your slave shall pray toward this place. Right? So right there, he says, God. Like right before that, he says, we know that the highest heaven can't contain you, but we pray that you will hear my prayer, and that you will hear all the prayers of those who are turned towards this place. And so the reason I want to highlight that is because what Daniel is doing here is not directly tied to the Torah. Right? The Torah, there's never a place in Deuteronomy or something where it says you must pray towards Jerusalem. In fact, Jerusalem is never even mentioned in Deuteronomy. It constantly makes mention of a place where God will choose to make his name dwell, but it never mentions Jerusalem, which I would actually argue is evidence that Deuteronomy was written early on. There are some people who try to argue that Deuteronomy was written like way later on in Israel's history.
Yeah.
But if that was the case, it would simply say Jerusalem, because there's other places that just outright names. But it says the place where God will choose to make his name dwell. And so the Torah never says you have to pray towards Jerusalem, which means that hypothetically, Daniel did not have to do this. Right? It's not like there's no law-given mandate that says you must pray towards Jerusalem 3 times a day, and if you don't do it, you're sinning. Which is interesting because have we seen situations like that also in the book prior?
Yes, we have. It's where an example would be where Daniel is goes to Nebuchadnezzar and he says, "Let us eat grain, not the king's choice food," and he chooses to draw the line there, even though that's not something that's like biblical. Where I'm sure God would have been okay with him eating the king's choice food, whereas here I'm sure God would have been okay with him praying with the door shut and everything, right? But here he chooses to do it that way because at least it's his way of showing reverence towards God.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, because Daniel chapter 1, a lot of people mistakenly think that he is saying, hey, we don't want to eat unkosher foods, but that's not what he says. He just says, we don't want to eat the king's choice foods, just give us a diet of grains. It just seems like he's just choosing something that he wants to hold himself to. It probably is to avoid eating anything sacrificed to idols, but even then, there's no Torah prohibition against eating stuff sacrificed to idols.
Mm-hmm.
And so Daniel is just choosing to do something that he is holding himself to. And we talked about this a little bit with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as well, to where God knows their hearts, right? I mean, they could have just knelt before the statue and said, God, we don't need it. But they said, no, we're drawing a line in the sand, and we're going to not kneel. And then now he does the same thing here. And so in all the instances where these Jewish people draw the line, they're actually not drawing the line in something that is explicitly spelled out in Scripture. They're doing something based on a personal conviction where they think that crossing that line would be too far. Why do you think that Daniel draws the line here? Why does he think, no, because literally all he has to do is close the window, right? It's not like he can literally see Jerusalem from where he's at, right? So it's not like having the window open is some magical thing. What is the purpose why does he draw the line there?
He wants to show that because he knows, maybe I'm thinking into it a little too much, right? Maybe he knows that they've been watching him, and he knows that if he changes his routine that they might think something might be up, or he doesn't want to seem like he's changing his ways because of the decree.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But, to go back to what we already talked about, doesn't the Bible tell us consistently to submit to the authorities above us? So far, he's been submitting. So why is it that he all of a sudden says, you know what, I'm not going to submit here?
I
Because
think it's because they're asking him to put other gods and other things before his God.
Okay.
Yeah.
But to be fair, it just says you can't appeal to any god apart from the king. So why can't he just go 30 days without doing it? Or again, close the window, right? He can just do it in private to where nobody knows, right? I mean, if he closes the window, they literally can't do anything. They could accuse him, but there's no proof. So why not just close the windows and do it in private? Or just, go 30 days and just be like, hey God, by the way, we're still good and I'm still going to pray to you quietly. I'm just not going to do the whole bowing down before Jerusalem and stuff. Why is it this line right here where he's drawing it? I'm mainly playing devil's advocate, trying to see if we can get down to I've got an opinion, but I'm not even going to say mine's the correct one.
I think a few things. One, maybe it's to test his own faith, trust God in everything, and even in a more risky situation, just you know, get over the fear and just live for God no matter what, and also to make a statement of faith to other people to show like what God will do out of all this, regardless
Okay.
of what happens.
Yeah, so that could be it. He knows where this is going to land him, and he's like, I know what God did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Y'all watch this. My opinion really comes down to motive, right? I think a lot of times, consistently throughout Scripture, we see that God cares about the heart, right? And really, all of our actions flow from our heart. And I have to ask myself, if Daniel were to close the windows, what would be his primary motive for doing so?
Shame.
It would be partially shame, but it would be primarily self-preservation,
Mm-hmm.
right? The only person he is serving is himself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas in other situations, submitting to the law, like he can submit to both the law and God because he is loving his neighbor, right? He is serving other people by doing so. Whereas in this case, the only person he is serving is himself. And so, to me, I'm thinking that he can't justify it because even though this is not, the law doesn't say you have to do this. He realizes the only person I'm harming is myself. Like, the only person being put in harm's way by me continuing to do this is me. And so I think he says, I'm going to keep doing it because that is not a good enough motive. Whereas, ironically, I think usually we reverse it. Usually we draw the lines in places where it really doesn't cost us anything, but it gets us a lot of like clout, and we're like, oh yeah, look at me, I'm a faithful Christian. But the moment it starts costing us something is the moment we start backing off. Whereas Daniel seems to reverse it, right? If there's a way where he can serve both God and his masters in a way that serves other people, he'll do it. But if this is if he's the only one whose life is at stake here, he can't justify not doing it. Because it's not like he's not putting other people in harm's way. It is simply his, who is he more devoted to? Does that make sense? Right? So it's a much more singular issue. I don't know if that's the correct reason. I can't read his mind, but if I had to guess, that would be it, because it's literally just, it's not like, it doesn't say that his family is going to be thrown into the lion's den as well, right? It's just that person's going to be thrown in. And to be fair, he doesn't have a family because he's a eunuch. But it seems like that's the main issue. It's like, okay, it's my life at stake, and I have to ask, that means that the only conflict here is a matter of devotion to God versus devotion to my life. And he says, well, I love God more than my life, and therefore I will sacrifice my life for God. Which is crazy, because that means that this is a very intentional thing, right? He has to walk over there, open the windows, and kneel down 3 times a day, knowing for a fact that in doing so, he is sacrificing his life. And keep in mind, the consistent testimony of these chapters has been that Daniel's a wise guy. He knows why this law has been put in place, right? If the king says, hey, by the way, all the satraps and commissioners agreed to this, he knows I wasn't present for that meeting. And there's only 2 other commissioners. Okay. He's putting things together. He knows this is targeted against me. And so he knows when he opens those windows, he knows that all eyes are on him. And he still does it. Right? And so this is it's an intentional moment of sacrifice. And so he faces Jerusalem. And again, the irony is that there is no Jerusalem. There is no temple. But he's still facing that way because of his faith in God. Because even if there is no temple, even if there's no city, that's still a place where God made his name to dwell. And so he looks in that direction. He continues kneeling 3 times a day. That'd be like morning, afternoon, evening. Praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously. I love that he's giving thanks. Right? Even though he knows where the story's heading. Right? He knows that he's heading to the lion's den. But he just gives thanks. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel seeking to make a petition and making supplication for his God. There's that phrase, by agreement, again. What does that tell us?
They were all in it together.
Yeah. They were conspiring together. They knew that this is exactly what he would do. Right? Again, they knew Daniel so well that they knew, yeah, this isn't... it even had told us that they were studying the law. Right? They knew the law of his God. And they knew that this was not a command in the law, yet they knew that this is the line he would not cross. and this is exactly what they set in motion. And so they were trying to put him in like a catch-22 situation. And so they showed up at the exact time when they knew he would be praying, and they came to capture him. Wait a second. Has there ever been a time where we have seen a group of people conspiring against a righteous man and come to apprehend him while he is praying?
Jesus.
Oh yeah, that happened with Jesus, didn't it? While he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, directly across from the temple in Jerusalem. Oh, crazy. Okay, interesting.
And also didn't. Never mind.
Yeah, it's going to be really wild if Daniel also gets thrown into a pit where a rock is put in front of the hole and then comes out alive. That'd be absolutely nuts. Anyways, the men came by agreement and found Daniel seeking to make a petition and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and they said before the king concerning the king's injunction, "Did you not sign an injunction that any man who seeks to make a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den?" Hey, Pontius Pilate, didn't you say that there's no king but Caesar? That's what I thought. This guy claims he's the king of the Jews. So you see the parallels in the story? They're like, didn't you say something like that? The king answered and said, "The word is certain, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked." I just feel that Darius is getting nervous right now. He sets this in motion, and then I'm imagining that this is like the next day,
Yeah.
right? Like,
No, what I
Absolutely.
imagine is that when the law was being brought across his desk, he's like, "This is very specific."
yeah,
It's like,
For 30 days,
well,
there's a
it's like,
ulterior
well, I
motive.
guess there's no ulterior motive here. Boom, sends it off, and then they come in the next day, and he's like, "Who are they going to tell me broke the law?"
yeah. And it happens to be the guy that he was wanting to be put in charge of the entire kingdom.
And
So
he's
Darius is putting this together too, but in his response, like I just imagine his like voice kind of quaking. He's like, "Yeah, the word is certain. Like that is the
it's like,
that is the letter of the law.
That's what I said.
correct." Like he's like, "I am beginning to regret my choices." And then they answered and said before the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah."
I think he heard the word Daniel, and it was just like his face.
Yeah. He pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but he keeps seeking to make his petition 3 times a day. Uh-oh.
I like that instead of having his like being angry at Daniel for, acting against him and being prideful and stuff. He's like, "How can I get Daniel out of this situation?"
No, yeah. His response is like, yeah, and that's why I would say Darius doesn't seem to be being fueled by pride. It seems like he was legitimately putting his trust in these governors to help him rule the kingdom well, but they backstabbed him. Which again highlights the irony of these people being in authority, but their authority is not as solid as they think. Right? He was doing what is objectively a wise thing to do, but it backfires him because no matter how much these emperors think that they're in charge, they're really not in charge. And so it doesn't seem like he's operating on the same pride as Nebuchadnezzar. And so as soon as the king heard this word, he was greatly distressed within himself. And he set his mind on saving Daniel, right? And he said, "Bring out Barabbas and let's offer, do you want to choose Barabbas or Jesus? What are we going to do here?" And then he eventually washes his hands of the crime and he says, "Oh, okay, just crucify him." Again, I'm highlighting the parallels between Jesus and Pontius Pilate and then what's going on here. There's a clear parallel going on there towards like history is repeating itself with Jesus. Which also serves to highlight how awesome Daniel is, because if you're ever being compared to Jesus, that's probably a pretty good sign. So the king heard this, he's greatly distressed. And you gotta know he's probably kicking himself in the butt, because he's probably like, "Man, I should have known this." We don't know how early on this was, but I'm assuming it was enough time for Daniel to have served as one of the commissioners and prove himself in such a way that Darius was wanting to elevate him higher. Right? So we know that several months, if not years, have passed at this point. And Darius has to have known Daniel well enough to have probably been able to perceive that this could have happened. And so he's got to be beating himself up that he didn't think it through. To where, obviously Daniel was not quiet about his faith, right? Everybody knew, oh yeah, like, this guy's Jewish. And because of decrees established by Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel had the freedom to worship, like, God. And so you got to imagine that Darius he just signed it off without thinking it through. And now he's like, crud. And so even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to deliver him. Which, that leads me to believe, again, that this is probably the very next day, because it says that Daniel would pray 3 times a day, which would be morning, afternoon, evening. And the fact that they're saying even till sunset suggests to me that they probably brought this to him in the morning, which makes me think that it was probably the very first morning. It's like Daniel just like wakes up for his early morning stuff, he lays down, and they're like, hello, and they bring him in. And so the irony with Pontius Pilate is he's not going to wait that long. He's going to have Jesus crucified by morning. So even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to deliver him, which really just shows you how much, not even necessarily that Darius cares for Daniel, but how much he values Daniel. Because obviously, if he cared for Daniel, he probably would have known him better and known, oh, maybe like this will not go well for the guy I'm wanting to put in charge of the kingdom. But he at least values him to where he's like, oh, I cannot afford to lose this guy. Especially when, once Daniel's dead, the only other people in charge are people who are willing to conspire against me to ascend the ranks. That's not a good look for him, right? This is a worst case scenario here. Again, kind of like Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate's put in a really weird scenario where like his whole job is to keep the peace between the Jews and the Romans and avoid any revolts. And now you've got the chief priests who are like, we want Jesus killed. And Pontius Pilate's like, all right, I talked to him and he did claim to be a king, but like, I don't think we have any reason to be threatened by him. And so I really don't want to put him to death. And if I don't put him to death, y'all are going to want to kill me. But if I do put him to death, his followers are going to want to kill me. And so Pontius Pilate also finds himself in a very weird scenario where he's like, these religious leaders, they're a thorn in my side. And like you feel that tension. And so Darius is in the very same place where by putting Daniel to death, he's basically putting to death the one chance he has at peace. And so these men came by agreement to the king. There's that phrase, by agreement again. And they said, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. And he's like, you didn't have to remind me. I knew that. And it seems like he had literally spent the entire day trying to think of a way to avoid it. Right? He was trying to find a loophole, but however the decree was actually written out, there wasn't a loophole. And then they just smugly come in there and remind him, hey, you can't push this off any longer. And that's when you just know that he's like, I'm going to destroy y'all. All right. Will it click? Come on. Why is my thing not clicking today? What is happening? Get up again. You know what? Oh, no, the battery's not dead. What is happening? Okay. Okay, it'll click there. Oh, I bet it's because this stuff's in the way. That's fine. All right. Joseph.
Yes.
You should read the verses, because I'm tired of talking.
Okay. Then the king said the word, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king answered and said to Daniel, your God, whom you consistently serve, will him.
It'll come back on.
Okay. Serve will him consistently serve will himself save you. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn, at the break of day, and hurriedly went to the lion's den. When the king had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king answered, said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you consistently serve, been able to save you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, saying, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and shut the lion's mouth. and shut the lions' mouths. They have not harmed me. Inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was greatly pleased, and he said for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no harm whatsoever was found on him because he had believed in his God. The king
You was a little slow on the roll there.
the king
What?
Nothing.
Okay. The king then said the word, and they brought out those men who had brought charges against Daniel and cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom, and before they reached the bottom of the lion's den, the lions overpowered them and crushed them to their bones.
Nice. So, delightful end for those guys. So here's the meat of the story, right? This is where you actually get the climax of things. I probably should have just left verses 16 through 18 on their own slide, so we had like the dramatic tension. So somebody summarize it. What happens in this passage?
So Daniel gets chucked into the lion's den and essentially lock him in there and say, okay, we're going to come back in the morning and see how he is. So then the king's all nervous, he can't sleep. King comes back in the morning, is relieved to find that Daniel's okay. And then the king was pleased, and he essentially looked at all the other guys and took their families and said, "No, I'm not."
Yeah, not even just them, but their families as well.
Yeah.
It also makes you wonder how many lions were in this den, because like there's a lot of people conspiring here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming it's not literally like all 120 something people, but like still that's a lot. So let's walk through it. So the king said the word, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. It's so intense, right? It's like, oh gosh, like he's so nervous to do it. He doesn't want to do it, but his hand is forced. And once again, you're left with the impression that this guy who is supposed to have supreme authority has no power at all, right? The law that he set in motion is now biting him in the butt. And here he is, like the whole, like his desire was to flex how much power he had. That is why these laws are unrevocable. But now he is the one who's the greatest victim of it. Well, I guess Daniel would be, but the good news is that Daniel's on God's side. So the king answered and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself save you." What's interesting about that phrase?
Darius almost seems like sure of it.
Yeah, and again, read this in light of what we read in the fiery furnace story.
Mm-hmm.
What was going on there? like how did Nebuchadnezzar speak to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
He was like, they're not for it. They're going in there.
Well, didn't he say something along the lines of, if any God saves you, surely they are like the true God?
I don't remember the exact phrase. Let me go look. But I remember it was like something where they responded and they said, well, he can save us. We don't know if he's going to.
Oh, true.
Let's see. So, it says, "Now if you are ready, at the time when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, then you shall fall down and worship," right? So he's saying, just do this. If you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can save you out of my hands?
Yeah.
So Nebuchadnezzar says, I don't think there's a God who can save you. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond, and they say, we don't even need to respond to you with an answer. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to save us. Mm-hmm. And then they're saved. Mm-hmm. So Nebuchadnezzar says, I don't even think there is a God who can save you. Mm-hmm. Darius says, your God whom you constantly serve will himself save you. Yeah. Why do you think that he says this so confidently?
Because he knows, like, he's read about the history of, what God has done in Babylon.
Yeah, I would assume he just knows the stories. Mm-hmm. And we also have to keep in mind that...
Because he literally, in this passage, says the living God when addressing,
Yeah. And we have to keep in mind that these stories are not exhaustive. And I imagine that Daniel and Darius have been talking over the last 24 hours. Because I'm sure that whenever Darius was trying to find a way to save Daniel, Daniel was probably there with him, right? And I imagine that, I mean, Darius might have known the stories already, but this would have been the perfect opportunity for Daniel to say, a few decades ago, whenever we were just little teenagers, my friends were in a very similar situation. And they survived through a fiery furnace. And for all the decades we've been here, God has provided for us. And the reason I'm in a position of power is because God has given me the ability to decipher dreams and visions that nobody else could. And so I'm assuming that Darius' confidence comes from the fact that he knows the stories as well. Which also is really cool if you think that, like, in regards to practical application for us. Right? Here you've got these Gentile kings who are learning to trust in the God of Israel because of God's faithfulness to the Jewish people. And that's kind of what we're doing, right? We are a group of Gentiles who are reading how God was faithful to the Jewish people, and that increases our confidence in what the God of Israel is able to do, right? And so that's kind of like almost like a self-aware way to read the scriptures, where it's like, hey, like we're kind of finding ourselves in Darius there because we're kind of in his shoes. So your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself save you, which is also ironic because it is Daniel's constant service of God which has led him into the lion's den.
I just realized you all are both wearing the same shirt.
Yeah, very similar one.
Is
yeah.
it?
Some of the pattern is slightly different.
Oh yeah, that's crazy.
Although I do have one that's got the same kind of a
That's-
few different colors.
That's
yeah.
kind of funny. But like I was saying, he says that the God whom you constantly serve will save you, which is ironic because the God that he constantly served is the reason why he's being thrown into the lion's den in the first place. And I think there's a sermon there as well, right? The idea is that, like, yes, God will lead you into the furnace, and he will lead you into the lion's den, and he will lead you into all sorts of situations. But if you stay faithful to him, he'll get you out of it too. You might not be alive when you come out of it, right? I mean, like, keep in mind, there is the possibility that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did die in the furnace, and that Daniel did die in the lion's den. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they admitted that was a possibility, right? And whenever Daniel was praying towards Jerusalem, I don't know if he knew that he was going to come out of the lion's den alive, right? And so we know what God can do, but that doesn't mean he's going to do it. But that doesn't mean that we should avoid the metaphorical furnace or lion's den altogether, right? We should stay faithful, even if it leads us there. Whenever you look to the apostles in the New Testament, God led them to the cross, and he led them to suffering and stuff like that. And for many of them, it led to their deaths. And so keep in mind that it can go both ways, but the constant call is for us to serve him either way. And so Darius is like, your God will save you. And Daniel's like, hopefully, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. And a stone was brought out and placed over the mouth of the den. All right, so Daniel is thrown into his metaphorical grave under the earth, right? And a stone is rolled over the top. And obviously Jesus was not put in the earth, but he does describe himself that way, right? He says, just as Jonah was 3 days in the heart of, in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days in the heart of the earth. Daniel's not going to be in there for 3 days, though. So, just one name. So a stone was brought up and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring. Wait a second. Didn't we read about another stone being sealed by a Gentile dignitary whenever a person was put into a tomb? That's also Jesus' grave, right? Like Pontius Pilate, he had the stone rolled in front of it, he put guards there, and it was sealed with the ring. Okay.
Get it? There's a lot of parallels.
I know, I'm just highlighting them along the way, okay? It's kind of cool. So the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Hey, that's the same reason why Pontius Pilate put the guards in front of the stone. It was so that nothing would be changed. Do you remember why he had to put the guards there? What were the Jews, or what did the religious leaders say was going to happen?
That people were going to steal the body.
Yeah, somebody might come steal the body and then claim that he resurrected. And so Pilate's like, all right, put the guards there. The body still left the tomb, so that kind of backfired. But again, the same thing's going to happen here as well, right? He's putting the signet ring here, basically because if the seal is broken, that implies that it's been tampered with. But it's not going to be tampered with, but he's still going to come out alive, which is
Sorry, I just thought of something as it relates to one of the many theories about, like, Jesus not really resurrecting. It's like I have a tough time believing that Roman guards could be overpowered by, like, a fisherman.
or much less a group of women.
Yeah.
The universal testimony of the Gospels is that women showed up to the tomb first. So that's embarrassing. It's like, wow.
Yeah, but it's like
Mary Magdalene is just jacked.
if any of the apostles came and tried to steal a body, you know, not like.
I mean, to be fair, Peter's nickname, his name means rock, so like he's Rocky. Like, I don't know. Maybe he was huge. I don't know. Anyways, back to this. He seals it to make sure it can't be tampered with, and then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him. Keep in mind, like that would be a regular thing for a king. You know, like every night you're just throwing a feast, you're throwing a party, you're having entertainment brought before you.
Bring the jester.
What's that? Oh, bring the jester. Yeah. That's also why he was so quick to just sign off on stuff, because this is kind of true in a lot of monarchies and stuff like that, or just like empires. The people in charge aren't really the ones who do the main work. You know, it's the other people, and the people in charge are just like the figureheads who just sign off on things. Mm-hmm. And his sleep fled from him. Wait a second. Is there a story that we have about somebody's sleep fleeting from them because they were really concerned about what was going to happen to a Jewish righteous man? This is a little bit of a deeper cut, but it's in there in the Gospels. Wasn't there somebody whose sleep was fleeting from them because, in their case, they had received very troubling dreams?
Are you talking about Pilate's wife?
Yeah, Pontius Pilate's wife. Yeah, she says, I have lost many hours of sleep on account of this man because I've had these troubling dreams. And so, again, there's another parallel. Then the king rose at dawn, at the break of day, and hurriedly went to the lion's den. Is there another story where there's a group of people who arose at dawn, at the break of day, to go check the stone? Yeah, that's the group of women on Sunday morning. They rushed. Yeah, okay, just sorry. I wish I could say I'm going to stop, but I'm not going to stop. So there's these parallels. The king arose at dawn, at break of day. He hurriedly went to the lion's den. He's wanting to check it out first thing in the morning. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. So in this case, the stone has not been rolled away. There's not angels around. But he cries out with a troubled voice, Daniel, buddy, pal, you in there? And the king answered and said to Daniel, Daniel, the servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to save you from the lions? That's a loaded question right there. So what does he ask?
If he's still alive.
That's part of what he asks. No, he doesn't ask, did God save you? What does he ask?
If he was able to.
Was he able to save you? To me, that changes the entire story right there. If Darius had asked a different question, Daniel might have died, right? If Darius said, did God save you? It could have gone a different way, and maybe God had allowed Daniel to die. But instead, Darius says, was God able to save you? And God's like, darn tootin', I'm able to. Like the moment that a Gentile king asks, is God able to do this? God's like, oh, let me show you what I can do. And so it's very possible that Darius' question right there is the thing that saved Daniel. So yeah, servant of the living God. He knows who Daniel is, and he realizes that Daniel's God is of a different caliber. Which again, it shows you that Darius' heart was not really behind that whole command. Darius, he was not functioning in the same way as Nebuchadnezzar. He did not have anything against the God of Israel. He was simply listening to his governors and not really thinking through the implications of it. So, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to save you from the lion's den? And the fact that he keeps referencing Daniel as constantly serving God, it reinforces the fact that he also knew that this was Daniel's character, which once again reinforces he just wasn't thinking through this. And that's even more dangerous whenever you have a guy who claims to have like unlimited authority to where you cannot revoke your commands, but it keeps showing evidence of the fact that he was not thinking through the commands that he issued. This is what we would call recklessness. And I am so glad that our God does not have reckless love. Sorry. Anyways, that's
that song.
I'm not going to bring it up again. I'm sorry. You haven't been here whenever I've gone on rants about that. But
You have.
Have I? Okay, I can't stand the song. But yeah, that's just glad that our God isn't like Darius. Then Daniel spoke to the king. "O king, live forever!" You know that Darius was so pumped at this moment. Like, he was not expecting this at all. This is great news. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also toward you, O king, I have done no harm. Hey, so it turns out that there was an angel present. That's kind of cool. We've seen another story where there were angels tending to the righteous man in his time of need.
Yes.
Yeah, well, actually, for Jesus, the angel came and tended to him while he was praying in the garden. But then there were also angels present at the tomb, and so it was really just, just kind of blended together. But several hundred years ahead of time. So he says, I'm chilling here. God was able. Like, you notice that he doesn't even answer the question. He doesn't say, oh yes, my God was able. He just explains how God did it. To where it's like Daniel's like if you go back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where Nebuchadnezzar says, what God is able? And they say, we're not even going to respond to that question. Of course he's able, we just don't know if he's going to. Right? Daniel kind of has that same logic where he's like, I'm not even going to answer that question. Of course God is able to. I'm just going to tell you how he did it. So he's like, yeah, my God sent his angel, shut the lions' mouths. Also, hold on a sec. Whenever Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were delivered from the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar saw something really strange going on. What was going on inside the furnace? There was a fourth man in the fire, right? And he says it looks like one of the sons of the gods. And we talked about this before, because a lot of people immediately say, oh, that's Jesus, right? And I think that we have good reason to believe that. But I said that at the very least, we should say that it's another character that shows up a lot in the Old Testament. And what is that character usually called?
The angel of the Lord.
The angel of the Lord, right? And the reason I said that is because if you remember, there's another story where the angel of the Lord shows up in a fire without being consumed, and that's in the burning bush, right? And so, if you're kind of putting all of this together, it would suggest that this angel who appeared to Daniel is one and the same, right? And so you've got this one like a son of man, or one who's like the son of the gods, standing in the fire that is burning but not being consumed, which sounds a lot like the angel of the Lord, who was in the bush, burning and not being consumed. And now Daniel says that there was an angel who was sent from the Lord to be with him in the lion's den. And so if you put all this together, it would seem to suggest that all of them are the angel of the Lord that shows up throughout the Old Testament and who the New Testament identifies as Jesus. And so I just think that's kind of cool. Anyways, and also keep in mind the word angel. I really honestly don't like that word because...
It just means messenger.
Well, yeah, the word just means messenger. It's a job description, and whenever we hear angel, we think of I don't know, just like little babies with like wings or something like that, but the word, it has like a very flexible meaning. That's why there's like all those memes on Instagram which are like, ooh, biblical angels, and then it'll show like this weird figure with like 1,000 eyes.
Yeah.
Well, that's because there's one angel who shows up in Ezekiel who looks like that. But that is not how all the angels look, because angel is not a type of being, it is a job description, right? When you go to the book of Revelation, there are human angels, right? Because it says, go deliver this to the angel of the church of Philadelphia. And it's John who's delivering it, and it's an angel talking to John, so it'd be really weird for a divine angel to speak to John and say, deliver this message to another divine angel. No, he's talking to the human messenger who's going to go to the church. And so an angel is just a messenger. And so here you have a messenger sent from God to shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. And so we would say as Christians that this was Jesus literally showing up and just like clamping the lion mouths shut.
He's like, hey, this setup gives me an idea.
Yeah, he's like, wow, this is cool. I might have to reuse this same decorations and stuff in a few hundred years. And then also it's kind of cool whenever you have the idea that Jesus is the lion from the tribe of Judah. And so he's just showing up in there, and he's like, "Hey, y'all lions, y'all shut up. I'm the big lion here. Yeah, I'm the alpha." And so Daniel's like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I've just been chilling out with the cats, and they've not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, I've done no harm." So he's like, "Oh yeah, God did it. I guess that he thought I was innocent, which is good, and turns out I'm also innocent towards you. I haven't done anything wrong." And so Daniel's like, everything's good in the hood, my friend. And the king was greatly pleased. and he said for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. I imagine so. And so this is where, again, we start seeing some differences between the Daniel and Jesus story, right? There's been this consistent parallel throughout the whole thing, but some differences. Jesus is going to be in the tomb for a little bit longer. We always say 3 days and 3 nights, but really, if you actually add it all up, it was actually like, it was like Friday evening, Saturday, and then Sunday morning. So really, it's actually about 48 hours. But still, it's a little bit longer. And whenever the women show up at the tomb, the stone is already rolled away and the tomb is empty. And then Jesus shows up later. And so there's some differences, but there is still that parallel. Because both of them end up making it out alive, and the thing that should have been their destruction was not. And another thing here is that Daniel is, that he doesn't actually die, right? I mean, as far as we know. I mean, I guess it's possible that he died and was also resurrected, but it doesn't tell us that. That would just be assumptions. But also, behind all of this, we must also remember, and maybe this is the purpose behind the lions then, I don't know. But what tribe is Daniel from? We learned this in chapter 1.
I'm going to assume Judah because of the association with lions.
Yeah, well, they were from, remember it said that they were royalty from, like, they were, like, some of the nobility that was shipped off in the first deportation of the Jews. And so they are from the tribe of Judah. And so Daniel belongs to the royal lineage of David. He's not like the direct heir or something like that, but he is at least part of the royal family. And so it could be that maybe that's the association, right? To where the Lion of Judah triumphs over these other lions. I don't know. I can't say that for certain, but that could be a connection. So Daniel's taken up out of the den. No harm whatsoever was found on him because he had believed in his God. So that's very similar to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They were taken out of the fiery furnace. And if you remember, not even their clothes smelled like smoke. So Daniel, he doesn't even have any fur on him. Like he's just chilling. Which, again, that's a difference between Daniel and Jesus. Because Jesus, he's going to go through death and come back to life, but even after he comes back to life, he still bears the scars. Right? Which, it kind of shows you, like Daniel was willing to die, but he was spared from it. And if you're kind of following with the same trajectory that you've been seeing since Genesis, it's almost like God's preparing somebody else to go through this, right? If you go back to whenever Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, he's literally got him tied up on the altar, and God says, I'll provide the sacrifice. And now you've got Daniel, who literally finds himself in the tomb, but he's spared from death. He comes out with no scars. But then you have Jesus, who is the ultimate Lion from the tribe of Judah, who does suffer unto death, and when he returns, he has the scars to prove it. And so, you see how the stories, they point towards something, but they're not the fulfillment. This is why whenever you, I don't know if y'all ever heard about, how C.S. Lewis came to Christ. C.S. Lewis, famous guy, wrote Narnia, wrote all these other really fun books. But he was an atheist for a long time. But the reason why he came to Christ is because he was really good friends with this guy named J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and stuff, and a group of other people. And through a series of discussions they had, he eventually became convinced of the truth of Christianity. And one of the things that finally sold him on the truth of it is Tolkien and their friends, they went for this walk. And while they were walking along this path, they were describing to him, they pitched Christianity as being the true myth. Because all of them were a big fan of story, they were big fans of storytelling and mythology, especially Norse mythology. And they just argued to C.S. Lewis that the reason why all stories are appealing is because they find their ultimate truth in Christianity, right? The reason why we love sacrificial heroes in stories is because there's something about a person who is willingly sacrificing themselves for another that rings true to being one of the highest values a person can ever achieve. And the reason why we love stories of, people conquering death is because that is the greatest problem known to man, and we long for that victory. Right, and so there's these certain stories that, we crave, and whenever you look at myths, you ever heard the whole hero's journey thing, when it comes to how to tell a story. The reason why certain tropes appeal to the human mind is because they're all pointing to this greater capital T truth. And basically, what Tolkien and them were saying is, well, if you look at Christianity, it is the true myth. If you look at all your favorite things about stories, they find the fulfillment in Christianity, but it's actually historically true. And then that was the thing where it got him thinking. He was like, oh, And it, like, all of a sudden, he had to look into it more and stuff, but that was the thing that really kind of convinced him. And I think we see that with Daniel here, to where you're reading it and you're like, wow, this story sounds a lot like another story. But it doesn't quite get to the same level of epicness. It's cool, but how much cooler would it be if the guy actually died in the den, and then he came out alive, and he had the scars to prove it? And he wasn't simply sending a message to a king and to an empire, but he was producing salvation forever. Like, it's like, to where once you get to the story of Jesus, it one-ups things consistently. And so, the king then said the word, and we know that the word cannot be revoked. The king then said the word, and they brought those men who had brought charges against Daniel, and they cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Oof. How do you feel about that?
Horrified.
It really is terrifying, right? Is this good? Is this bad? What do we have to say about it?
Probably.
I would say definitely for the men, but potentially could have spared his wives and children.
I'm gonna assume he had the other family members killed as like a display of his power, in order to show, hey, this is what happens if you, cross me or a man of God. Like, not only you, but like other people who also suffer too. You better watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is one of those places where we need to be, I think, careful to point out the difference between like descriptive and prescriptive. To where sometimes the Bible's just describing what happened, and sometimes it's prescribing it and saying this is how things should be. We don't know whether or not the author is giving his approval to what Darius did here. But at the same time, like, to us it seems extreme, but I would argue that there is a way to view it where it actually isn't that extreme. But really, what I really want to say is that we can't say either way, right? To me, it seems like that might be overkill, right? But there are a lot of things we don't know. First off, we know that, if you go to the Esther story, you'll remember that whenever Haman was plotting against the Jews, he didn't do it alone. It tells us on several occasions, he went home to his family and discussed it. And so it's very possible that the satraps didn't conspire by themselves. But even if they did conspire by themselves, right? Again, that's assuming some things. But even if they did conspire by themselves, we do know what God says, that he visits the sins of the father on the children to the third and fourth generation. To where all because these people died does not mean that they are guilty of what happened, but it is saying that, you know what? Sometimes there are innocent casualties from one person's sin, right? If I go and I squander all my money, well, my kids are going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And unfortunately, these satraps and governors and stuff, they played with fire, and now their wives and kids, even if they're innocent, are suffering. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is just suffering, but it's just a fact of reality of living in this world. And this is the king's way of asserting that nobody else does this, right? He's pointing out, your actions don't simply affect yourself, they affect everybody around you. In their goal to ascend to the top, they actually destroyed not only themselves, but their entire family line and their legacy, right? They have cut off all possibility of any glory in the future, because now their families are gone. And in a way, that is a very biblical lesson, right? God is constantly trying to teach us, your sin doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody. And so that's where, this feels harsh, but it is just the reality of life. And whether or not this is God's act of divine judgment upon them, or simply the king's act of judgment, we can't really say, but we do know that God allowed it to happen. And so that's what happens. The fact that it says that they were destroyed before even reaching the bottom of the pit would suggest to me that maybe God had a hand behind this, because we know from earlier in the same paragraph that God is capable of shutting the mouths of the lions. And I guess the lions were just really hungry. But yeah, I do imagine that there's some hyperbole going on here, right? Given how many people are being thrown into this pit, I doubt that they're it's almost cartoonish if you just actually picture it. It's like the lions are just biting them down to the bone by the time they get down there. The idea is that they were killed very quickly, in contrast to Daniel. What's being communicated is that it wasn't that Daniel had been thrown into a pit of lions that weren't hungry, right? It's like, no, these lions, they can kill, and they can kill a lot. So it wasn't accidental that Daniel survived. All right. Hey, my clicker actually worked that time. All right, verses 25 to 28. Brianna, would you like to read that?
Sure. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue who were inhabiting the land, "May your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and to be in dread before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be unto the end. He saves and delivers and does signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel enjoyed success in the kingdom of Darius and in the kingdom of Cyrus the Persian.
Alrighty. So, how does the chapter end?
Darius proclaims that everyone should fear the God of Daniel, the living God, which is similar to what Nebuchadnezzar said after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were.
It is very similar, isn't it? That's going to become relevant next week, especially. So Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue. Whenever you hear that phrase repeated, what story does it make you think of? We brought it up almost every week in the book of Daniel. Peoples, nations, men of every tongue. What story tells us the origin of peoples, nations, men of every tongue? Tower of Babel, right? And where they are currently at, sure, the Persians are the ones in charge, but they're in Babylon, right? And so here, what's cool here is that there's a reversal taking place, right? At the Tower of Babel, people were seeking to make a name for themselves, and as a result, they were scattered into several peoples, nations, men of every tongue. But now, because one man was willing to make a name for his God, now you've got the king of Babylon. He is calling all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue to worship that one true God. And so now you have all the Gentile nations being united under the God of Israel, which is really cool. And spoiler alert for next week's chapter, Daniel's going to argue that this is where the story is ultimately heading, right? So recently, we just launched this podcast that we're doing, like me and Sean, where we're walking through Scripture, and we're going through Genesis right now, and we're arguing that the early chapters of Genesis are setting in motion the entire story. And arguably, Genesis chapters 1 through 11 are giving us all the problems that need to be resolved. And so whenever you look at Tower of Babel, that is it shouldn't be a shock to us that after the Tower of Babel, the very next chapter, God calls Abraham. Because the Tower of Babel story explains the need for the people of Israel. Because God says, okay, now everybody is scattered. How am I going to bring people back together? I'm going to choose one nation through whom to be a light to the Gentiles, to eventually bring all people back to myself, and then the Messiah is going to come through him. And so we know that the story of the Bible is only going to end once Babel has been reversed, right? Basically all the stuff that happens in Genesis 1 through 11, all those problems need to be resolved. And we get a foreshadow of this in the book of Acts, right? Because the moment that the Spirit of God descends upon the church, what do they begin to do?
Speak in many different tongues.
They begin to speak in tongues, and people from all the different nations who have gathered in Jerusalem, they hear the gospel being proclaimed in their own language. And it says that 3,000 people came to believe. And so all of a sudden, the moment that the church is born, Babel begins to unravel, right? To where all of a sudden, the nations are regathering under the one true God. And there's a new structure being built to heaven, but it isn't a structure made of brick and mortar, but it's a structure built on the blood of Christ. And ultimately, spoiler alert for the book of Revelation, that's where the whole story's heading, right? To where people of every tribe, tongue, and nation are all worshiping the one true God. And everybody who doesn't, well, they're going to face the same fate as the people who went through the flood. And so, Darius the king wrote to all peoples, nations, men of every tongue, who were inhabiting all the land. He said, "May your peace abound." He says, "Shalom, brothers. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and be in dread before the God of Daniel." So one thing we need to be clear here is that he does not say that, you must be in fear of only him, right? And so this is not to suggest that that the Persian Empire was a monotheistic Jewish empire. That's not what it's saying. But it is saying that he is acknowledging that there is something to the Jewish God. So everybody should fear him. For he is the living God and enduring forever. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And his dominion will be unto the end. He saves and delivers and does signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also saved Daniel from the power of the lions. All right. So, Nick already mentioned this, but where have we seen something like this before?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar said this. Nebuchadnezzar said this. Back in chapter 3, verse 28. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and saved his servants, and who put their trust in him, violating the king's word, and gave up their bodies so as to not serve and to not worship any god except their own God. So he praises God and says, I'm glad that they listened to God and not to me. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. So Nebuchadnezzar says, you cannot say anything bad about this God. And now Darius says, you must honor this God. And so, again, you see that even though the Jewish people have been rejected by their God and they are now in Babylon, the Gentiles are now coming to believe in God. That's Deuteronomy chapter 32, right? Like where God says, if you reject me, I will reject you, and I will go to people that are not a nation. And then, also, if you go into chapter 4, verse 3, Nebuchadnezzar says, how great are his signs, how strong are his wonders, his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I want you to keep in mind all this language, right? There's a reason why I just reread it. These kings are continually saying that the God of the Jewish people has an everlasting kingdom, his dominion has no end, he has all power to judge and to rule and to reign forever. And the reason why that's important is because this language is going to show up again in the next chapter, but it's going to be applied to somebody other than just the God of Israel. That specific verse is going to be the thing that is quoted in the New Testament more than almost any other verse in the Bible. So we'll talk about that next week. And so verse 28, so this Daniel enjoyed success in the kingdom of Darius and in the kingdom of Cyrus the Persian. Shocker, Daniel was successful, as he has been in basically every single king's reign at this time. Anything y'all want to add to this? I've got a few more things I want to mention, but anything y'all want to say about the chapter? Good comment, Nick. Anybody? Going once, going twice. Alright. Real quick, I've got my notes here about the Daniel and Jesus parallels. I just got to go through them and make sure that I covered all of them.
I was just about to ask.
Yeah, so first off, both Daniel and Jesus were under suspicion by powerful people, right? Who tried to test him and trap him in multiple occasions, but they could not find any way to entrap him. And so they had to come up with a legal loophole to entrap him, not according to themselves, but in the laws of the land. There was a conspiracy to trap him by the law. He was apprehended in a place of prayer, right? So Daniel is praying on the roof in his house. Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. They're both facing the temple. I don't know what way Jesus was facing, but the temple is literally like a stone throw away. So, they are both condemned to death by someone who doesn't want to kill them, right? Darius does not want to kill them, but his hands are forced by the conspirators. Pilate does not want to kill Jesus, but his hands are forced by the chief priests. Both of them are locked away in a den, and they are sealed with and that den is sealed with a stone. Daniel's is a vertical den. Jesus is horizontal. Not that's really important. And then both of them come out of the place of death and are exalted to a higher position. So Jesus is exalted to the right hand of the Father. Daniel is exalted to a higher place in the kingdom. But what's interesting about that is that in the very next chapter, we will hear about one like the Son of Man who is exalted to the right hand of the Father. So it's almost like this story is setting up a story about another guy. And so whenever you're reading this, you're like, wow, it sounds like this is setting up the Jesus story. And then you read chapter 7, you're like, oh, it quite literally was setting up the Jesus story. And so just keep that in mind. Let's see. Okay, other thing. This is just like a broader parallel that we see in this story that also applies to like Jewish history in general at this time. What the Gentile people purposed to destroy the Jews, so like in this case it'd be the lions that were purposed to destroy Daniel, it became the very thing which God used to both guard and save the Jews in order to bring judgment on the Gentile instigators, right? So you've got these Gentile people who say, we don't like Daniel, and so we are going to get these lions, and we are going to use the lions to kill Daniel. But God says, no, 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 no. I'm going to actually allow the lions to guard Daniel, and the very thing which you used to try to harm him, I'm going to use to destroy you, right? So that's what happens in this story. But that's also what we see happening more broadly in the Jewish people's history at this time, right? So you have the Babylonians, who were Gentile oppressors, right? And God appointed them to like destroy the Jewish people, right? And so they did that. But whenever you actually look at the book of Daniel, it's almost like the Babylonians, more than destroying the Jewish people, they were actually almost appointed as like their guardians, right? To where whenever you're reading through this story, the Babylonians are just the ones that God has placed in charge of them. And then once you keep reading this story, you actually see that it's the Gentile oppressors who end up being killed, right? So here you've got Gentiles who are trying to destroy the Jews, but then they end up bringing about their own undoing. That's kind of cool. And then this is another thing that I just addressed earlier at the very beginning. But I was listening to a podcast that was talking about this chapter, and they brought up this point, and I just thought it was interesting, and so I brought it up several times. But they pointed out that, in general, politicians aren't in as much control as they think they are. And we see that in this chapter, but it's also true just in general. Oftentimes, we presume that we are masters of technology since we created it, but we can be left trapped within systems of our own creation, right? And so here you've got Darius, who thinks like, oh yeah, I made this law, I'm in charge, but in reality, he becomes a victim of it. And we saw the same exact thing with Nebuchadnezzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar set in motion this law that, like, if it had gone according to his original plan, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have been killed, and it's only by the divine intervention of God that they were saved, right? And the same is true in our own lives where, I mean, I was more thinking of this in regards to just all technology that we have nowadays. There's like this weird human desire to just like advance further and further and further, and we think that we're in control of things, but in reality they like destroy us. So like these smartphones and stuff, like they're such a smart invention, but they are absolutely destroying society, right? To where it's like people like they're constantly attached to the screens, they can't get away from it. Our attention spans are getting shorter. We're being consumed by this stuff. Same thing's going to be true with AI, right? You have all these movies for like decades that are being like, don't make AI, it's going to get really bad. And you're seeing like Terminator and all this stuff. It's like, don't do it. And we're like, I think we're going to do it anyways. And the whole idea is that whenever we create something, we think that makes us the master of it. But oftentimes, it's like the Frankenstein story, where we create this monster that we don't know how to contain, and then it ends up biting us in the butt. And that's what happens whenever humans are swelling up in pride, right? You go back to the Tower of Babel, right? They were over here, let's get together and make a name for ourselves. Let's make this structure. And what ends up happening? They end up being scattered, and God humbles them. And so I think that like the whole point that the people on the podcast were saying is that there is an application from there that we have to be cautious of, right? Because we can't simply say, oh, stupid politicians. No, politicians are the ones who are in power to the degree where what they do affects everybody. And so that's why they keep getting brought up in the Bible. But we're foolish to think that we don't do the same things in our own life. Where, we can obviously go about creating things that can also bring about our own destruction. So I thought that was interesting. And they also pointed out that God can use those things to judge, right? In this instance, God actually used the law that the people created to bring judgment upon themselves. Right? The lion's den was never even a factor until the satraps and governors brought it up, and they ended up being the ones being swallowed in it. And then the fiery furnace was never brought up until Nebuchadnezzar brought it up, yet in the end, it was his own guards and stuff who got burned up in the flames. Let's see, I don't need to say all that. And they were just saying only God can exercise power and truly be master of things. He's the only one who's truly sovereign. Like, any time in the Bible where you see a person exerting power and thinking that they're in control, God immediately humbles them and says, "You're not in control." Whereas consistently, literally from Genesis chapter 1, God makes it clear, I am in control. I know what's going on here. I know the difference between good and evil. But, I mean, literally Genesis chapter 3, humanity's greatest sin is that we think we know good and evil better than we actually do. And so we look at things that God calls evil and we say, no, it's actually good. And we take it for ourselves. And then we're surprised whenever we're like naked and ashamed and getting kicked out of the garden. It's like, what are we doing? It's like, yeah, you should have just listened to God. And so we're all guilty of that. And so the law that Darius implemented turned against him, just like the lions turned against the people who put the law in place. Right? And so he was like, oh yes, this law sounds like a good idea. But then the next morning he's like, oh crap, I might have to kill my favorite advisor. And then they were like, hey, this lion's den sounds like a good idea. And then the next day they're falling into the lion's den being like, oh crap, I'm about to be eaten by lions. But then the consistent thing throughout this story is that God is in control of both the laws and the lions. And so everybody else is being mastered by the things that they're trying to set in motion, but God's the one in charge of all of it. And so I just thought that was kind of a cool application it's a little different than the applications we typically draw out of it. But basically humble yourself, and the moment you think you're in control, you need to basically realize you ain't in control. So, all right, anything y'all want to say? I've talked enough. Going once, going twice. Yeah, I think I put you to sleep. All right. Cool. Well, can I get somebody to close us out in prayer?